My girlfriend cheated on me with my best friend. It broke me. Now, 5 years later, just days before my wedding, a shocking truth was revealed that changed everything I thought I knew about what really happened that night. At T29, my world crumbled. It was a complete mess involving my ex-girlfriend, Jane, and my former roommate, Ted, who I thought was a friend. Jane and I had been together for a while. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but I never suspected anything was happening, especially not right under my nose. Looking back, there might have been hints, her laughing too loudly at his silly jokes, or spending too much time in his room watching movies on his large TV. But I dismissed it because I trusted them. A difficult lesson, I suppose. One evening, returning home from work, I found them both behaving oddly, overly pleasant, as if trying too hard to act normal. Jane, who rarely cooked, offered me dinner, and Ted asked if I wanted to grab a burger. It felt off, like they were both hiding something and trying to overcompensate. At the time, I just thought they were in good spirits, and frankly, I was too tired to question it. Then, one night, the truth emerged in the worst possible way. I was fast asleep when my phone vibrated with a text from our mutual friend, Kyle. Around 2 a.m. It was a screenshot of a conversation where Jane admitted to a friend that she and Ted had been seeing each other for months. Months. My head reeled. I desperately wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, but I knew Kyle wouldn't lie about something like that. His message simply read, "Dude, I thought you should know." That was it. I just stared at the screen, a wave of nausea washing over me. My hands shook, and every happy memory with Jane, every late-night conversation with Ted, simply disintegrated. This was the woman I was planning to propose to, and my friend, who I'd let stay with us to get back on his feet. I felt like a complete fool. After a few minutes, I decided to confront them. I stormed out of my room and straight to Ted's door. I didn't even knock. I just flung it open. There they were, sitting together on his bed, looking like two children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. The expressions on their faces confirmed everything. Jane mumbled some nonsense about wanting to tell me, and that it had just happened. Just happened? Like I was supposed to believe that garbage. It felt like everything moved in slow motion. There was shouting. I don't even recall half of what I said, only that I was absolutely furious. Ted tried to act tough, claiming it wasn't a big deal because, in his opinion, Jane and I weren't working out anyway. Jane just sat there, looking on the verge of tears, but honestly, I didn't care. She had months to talk to me if she was unhappy, months to end things, instead of whatever they were doing. When things began to settle down, as much as they could in that situation, I told them both to leave. I didn't care where they went. I just wanted them out of my sight. Ted tried to reason with me, saying he didn't mean for things to get this far, as if that somehow made it better. Meanwhile, Jane just kept repeating that she never wanted it to happen this way. It was all excuses, things they probably thought would make me feel better, but nothing they said could undo it. That night, I ended up sleeping on a friend's couch, needing to be anywhere but that apartment. The next morning, after no sleep, I decided it was time to leave for good. I returned to the apartment to collect my belongings, and of course, they were still there. Jane tried to stop me, going on about not wanting to lose me as a friend, which was a joke, because friends don't do what she did. I threw whatever I could into bags and boxes, not even bothering to pack neatly. I just wanted out. Ted stood in the corner, avoiding eye contact, the coward he is. Finally, I was done. I told them both I wanted nothing to do with them ever again. Jane seemed like she wanted to say something, but I didn't stay to hear it. I just left and never looked back. After that, I was finished with them, done with the entire situation. I didn't tell our mutual friends what happened because, frankly, I figured they'd find out soon enough. But here's what truly hurt. They didn't care. A few people reached out to apologize for the drama, but when it came down to it, they chose to remain friends with Jane and Ted. I didn't know whether to laugh or be angry, but it simply confirmed what I needed to do. I cut them all off, every single one. I moved back to my home state, changed my number, deleted all my social media, and essentially vanished from that entire friend group. It felt brutal at first, like I was abandoning everything. I knew. But honestly, I knew I had to. I would never move on if I kept clinging to people who didn't support me. So I let go of it all, and I've never regretted it. It was challenging, especially early on. There were days I wondered if I was being too harsh or letting anger control me. But every time I even considered reaching out, I'd recall that night and how they both looked at me, as if I was the one disrupting their imagined love story. I mean, seriously, I wasn't the one sneaking around and lying to people's faces. Life wasn't perfect immediately after. I went through a difficult period, trying to rebuild things on my own. But gradually, I found new friends, got my career on track, and started advancing bit by bit. I built a life I could be proud of, and eventually, I met Ashley. She's everything Jane wasn't: honest, loyal, and truly respectful of the people in her life. She knew about my past and was understanding of it. She respected that I had left all that behind and never tried to revisit it. And with her, I genuinely started to feel happy again. So there I was, years later, engaged to the most amazing woman I could imagine, miles away from the past drama. I thought I was free and clear, that I had put all that baggage behind me for good. But as it turns out, I was mistaken. Jane and Ted weren't done with me just yet. Alright, so I was finally in a good place. After everything with Jane and Ted, I put that mess behind me, severed all ties, and moved on. I was happily engaged to Ashley and truly believed I'd closed that chapter for good. But that wasn't going to be the case. It all began with one simple post. I'm not a big social media user, but I thought, hey, why not share some good news? So I posted a picture of Ashley and me with a simple caption about our engagement. Just a quick shot of us looking happy, nothing flashy. I expected a few likes from family and the handful of friends I still keep in touch with, and that was it. Little did I know, that post would ignite the spark that dragged all that old drama right back into my life. A couple of days after I posted, I got a random message notification. I glanced at my phone, and there it was, a message from Jane. I nearly dropped my phone. I mean, after years of absolute silence, out of nowhere, she decides to reappear. I didn't even open it. I just stared at her name, and all those old feelings came rushing back. The anger, the betrayal, everything. My initial reaction was to just delete it, but I paused for a second, trying to figure out why on earth she would reach out now. I hadn't thought about her in ages, and I was happy with Ashley, so I didn't need any closure or anything. I wasn't interested in hearing her side, her excuses, nothing. I had made my peace a long time ago. So, without opening the message, I blocked her. Problem solved, right? Or so I thought. I told Ashley about it that night. I didn't want any secrets between us, especially with something that felt like a strange echo from the past. She just laughed it off and said, "You did the right thing. Just in case," and blocked Jane too. We both figured that would be the end of it. Jane got her closure, or whatever, and could move on as well. But then the fake profiles started appearing. At first, I didn't notice, because, as I said, I'm not very active on social media. But Ashley started getting strange friend requests from random accounts with no posts and generic profile pictures. She's smart, though, so she didn't accept any of them. After a few, she began to suspect it might be Jane, and I had to agree. I mean, who else would be so persistent? It was honestly just annoying more than anything. I hadn't thought about Jane in so long, and now here she was, playing games and trying to get my attention like we were still in high school. Eventually, I just decided to delete my social media entirely. There was no point in keeping it if it was just going to be used as a way for her to bother me. I figured if I wasn't online, she'd have no choice but to drop it. Before I deleted my account, I sent a quick message from one of her fake profiles that had finally messaged me directly. I told her to leave me alone and that I wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't even give her time to reply. I hit send and blocked her right after. Then I wiped the whole account. Finally done, right? I figured she'd get the hint and move on with her life. But no, not even close. Apparently, when I shut down my accounts, Jane decided to go around me entirely. A couple of days later, my sister Mandy called me out of the blue. Mandy and I are close, but we don't usually talk every day, so I thought she was just calling to chat or ask about the engagement plans. But she sounded serious, and I could tell something was wrong. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before she just said, "Oh, hi. I need to talk to you about something weird." I thought, great, what now? She started telling me how Jane had reached out to her, and not just a casual, "Hey, how's it going?" message. Jane apparently went straight into some bizarre story, claiming, "I had a son." Yes, you read that right, a son. At first, I laughed. I mean, it was ridiculous. I told Mandy she was probably just trying to get attention or something, but Mandy wasn't laughing. She said Jane was serious and sounded quite desperate. Mandy had even tried to dismiss her, but Jane was persistent. She had sent her pictures of this kid, saying how much he looked like me, talking about how she never wanted to keep this a secret, and so on. I didn't believe it. The way I saw it, this was just Jane's last-ditch effort to get my attention. I mean, if this were true, she had years to come forward. If this kid was mine, wouldn't she have tried to contact me about child support, or at least told me when she found out she was pregnant? It made no sense to me, and I told Mandy as much. But Mandy said Jane seemed pretty insistent. I could tell Mandy wasn't sure what to believe either, which only made it weirder. The whole thing messed with my head. I tried to dismiss it as another one of Jane's lies, but a part of me was stuck on the what if. What if she was actually telling the truth? The timing seemed far too convenient, and I wasn't exactly in the mood to believe anything that came out of her mouth. But the idea of having a child out there, it's not something you can just ignore. For the next few days, I couldn't focus. I'd be at work, and my mind would wander back to Jane and this supposed son. Ashley noticed I was acting off and kept asking if I was okay. I didn't want to drag her into the mess, so I just said I was dealing with some work stress. But in reality, my mind was all over the place. The thought of a child, my child, possibly being out there, it didn't sit right. Finally, I decided I couldn't just ignore it. I wanted to make sure Jane didn't somehow show up at our door next. I had to put an end to this once and for all, one way or another. So I called a lawyer. I didn't want to deal with her directly, but I figured a lawyer could send a letter, something official, to tell her to back off. I just wanted her out of my life. No more games, no more drama. I was moving forward with Ashley, and I didn't need my past dragging me back. I explained everything to the lawyer. All the messages, the fake profiles, and finally, the news about his son. He listened and nodded, saying he'd take care of it. He said he'd send her a letter asking her to provide proof if she was serious, otherwise to leave me alone. It was a relief to hand it off to someone else. I didn't want to deal with Jane myself, and having a lawyer involved made me feel like this was finally going to be handled. With the lawyer involved, I thought this would finally be over. I felt like a weight was finally off my shoulders. I was done with Jane's nonsense, or at least I thought I was. I figured she'd get the letter, and that would be enough to make her back off. But just a few days later, the lawyer called me, saying he needed to see me in person to discuss the situation. I figured he was just going to tell me Jane had backed off, so I walked into his office feeling pretty relaxed. He sat me down, didn't say much at first, just handed me an envelope. Inside were several pictures of a little boy, and I don't know how else to say it, but the kid looked exactly like me. It was eerie, like looking at an old picture of myself when I was younger. The same dark hair, same eyes, even a similar smile. I just sat there staring, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. My lawyer explained that Jane sent him these pictures as proof, along with a note explaining the timeline. According to her, she got pregnant not long after I caught her and Ted together, but she and Ted both assumed the baby was his. She claimed they didn't say anything to me because they thought Ted was the father and just went on with their lives. It wasn't until later, when they tried to have more children, that they found out Ted was sterile. Apparently, that's when the doubts started creeping in for them. I'll be honest, part of me still thought this was some elaborate scheme. I mean, Jane had never exactly been trustworthy, and it just seemed too convenient. But the photos, they were hard to argue with. The kid had features that were undeniably mine. Still, I wasn't going to take her word for it without real proof. So I told my lawyer to arrange a DNA test. I needed something concrete before I could even begin to process what was happening. Waiting for those results was agonizing. Every day felt like a week, and I could barely focus on anything else. I told Ashley what was going on, because I didn't want to keep her in the dark, and she was supportive, but I could tell she was worried. I mean, this wasn't just some random drama. If this child was mine, it was going to change everything. She stuck by me, though, reassuring me that whatever happened, we'd handle it together. After what felt like forever, the results finally came in. My lawyer called me and said, "It's a match." I didn't know what to feel: relief, shock, anger, maybe a mix of all of it. Here I was, just finding out I had a son I'd never known about. A son who'd been raised thinking Ted was his father, who had no idea who I was. It's one thing to find out you're a dad. It's another to realize you've missed the first 5 years of your child's life because someone kept it from you. My head was spinning. I tried to wrap my mind around the fact that this little boy was mine, that I had a son. But then, almost immediately, my thoughts went to Ted. How had he gone along with all this, raising my child as his own while knowing there was a chance it wasn't his? And Jane, she'd had years to come clean, years to at least give me a heads up. But instead, she kept it buried, only coming forward now that she saw I was doing well. It was impossible not to feel used, like she'd only reached out because suddenly my life looked good on paper. It wasn't about me, and it definitely wasn't about the kid. She just saw an opportunity and decided to seize it. That realization was like a punch to the gut, and it only fueled my anger. But at the same time, I had to think about my son, about what this meant for him. He didn't ask to be brought into this mess, and I wasn't going to abandon him just because his mom and dad had lied to me. I told my lawyer to get in touch with Jane and Ted and tell them that, yes, I would be involved in my son's life. I wanted visitation rights, and I was more than willing to pay child support. I wasn't going to let them dictate terms anymore, especially after everything they'd hidden. But as soon as my lawyer mentioned visitation, Ted lost it. From what my lawyer told me, Ted insisted he was the kid's real dad and didn't want me around his son. I mean, talk about audacity. The guy cheats with my girlfriend, raises my son without saying a word to me, and now wants to pretend I don't exist. I was fuming. I told my lawyer to tell Ted that if I'm paying child support, I'm not just some random check in the mail. I was going to be a part of my son's life, whether he liked it or not. Of course, Jane intervened, trying to smooth things over. She suggested we could work something out where I'd pay, but maybe visitation could be discreet to avoid confusing the kid. I wasn't having it. If they wanted money, they'd better be prepared to let me be there as his father, plain and simple. And if they refused, I'd start a savings account for my son and let him access it when he turned 18. But I wasn't going to play along with whatever twisted setup they had in mind. The whole situation felt surreal. Here I was, ready to be a dad, something I never thought I'd have to consider so soon, and all I got was resistance. I couldn't understand their logic. They wanted my money, but didn't want me involved. It felt like they were trying to cherry-pick the parts of me they wanted in their lives, as if I were just some wallet they could call up when it suited them. I wasn't about to stand for it. I decided to push harder. I told my lawyer to make it clear that if I was going to pay child support, I'd pursue full visitation rights, or whatever rights I was entitled to as his biological father. I wasn't going to let them turn me into some background character in my son's life. And if they didn't agree, then they'd get nothing from me financially. I'd rather save up for my son's future than let them control this situation. Jane and Ted threw every guilt trip imaginable, calling me selfish and saying I was just trying to ruin their family. It's honestly ridiculous coming from the two people who hid a whole child from me. Selfish? If anything, they were the selfish ones, pretending they were this perfect family while knowing the truth the whole time. So here I was, ready to fight for my son. I don't know how this will play out, but I know one thing. I'm not letting them push me out of his life. They may have kept him from me for 5 years, but I'll be damned if I let them keep him from me any longer. After telling my lawyer I was in for the long haul, we got serious about what I could actually do. Legally, it's not as straightforward as you'd think. Jane and Ted had a head start. 5 whole years, and because Ted was on the birth certificate, he was considered the legal father. My lawyer explained that in situations like this, even though I'm the biological father, it's not a simple matter to just step in and get full rights. It was going to take time, money, and a lot of patience. And patience isn't exactly my strong suit. Jane and Ted didn't make it easy either. My lawyer reached out to set up a meeting to discuss visitation, but Ted refused to even sit down. He sent a long, dramatic email about how he's the only dad my son has ever known, and he didn't want to disrupt the kid's life by letting me into it. He actually used the word disrupt, as if my son was some project he was working on and didn't wanting to mess up. This guy? Meanwhile, Jane kept trying to negotiate some sort of strange middle ground. She suggested I could visit my son, but only if it was on her terms. She wanted me to agree to see him maybe once every few months, preferably with Ted not around. Apparently, the idea was to keep things low-key so the kid wouldn't feel confused about who his dad was. But here's the thing. I am his dad, biologically and morally. I wasn't going to let them just shove me into some hidden side role in my own child's life. I told my lawyer that their terms were unacceptable. Either they let me into his life as his father, or I wasn't going to give them a dime. They couldn't have it both ways, no matter how much they tried to make it sound reasonable. And predictably, they flipped out. Jane was suddenly sending emails filled with guilt trips, stuff about how I was hurting my son by refusing to contribute financially. Ted, on the other hand, was going full territorial, sending messages saying I was only around because I didn't want my past mistake to haunt me. Mistake? My son wasn't a mistake. If anything, the only mistake here was trusting either of them in the first place. So my lawyer went back and forth with them for weeks. At this point, the emails were a mix of attempts to shame me, guilt me, and persuade me to just give up. But every time, I'd sit there and think about my son. He didn't know me yet, but I wanted to make sure that when he was old enough, he'd know I fought to be in his life. I wasn't just going to write checks and stand by while some other guy played the role that should have been mine. Finally, after what felt like ages, we managed to get them to agree to a sit-down meeting. It was incredibly awkward. Jane showed up first, looking tense, like she was about to face some corporate board or something. Ted walked in a few minutes later, didn't look at me once, just sat down and crossed his arms like he was staging some silent protest. The energy in that room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Jane started talking, going on about how she'd only kept this a secret because she thought it was for the best. For the best? I asked her, barely able to keep my voice steady. How was keeping a kid from his father for 5 years for the best? She stammered through some excuse about thinking Ted was his dad and how she didn't want to complicate things by bringing me into it. Then Ted chimed in, finally deciding to speak, and he was in full-on defensive mode. I raised him. I taught him to ride his bike. I've been there for every scraped knee, every school project, he said, like I was some intruder trying to steal his kid. The thing is, I get it. He's been there, he's done the dad stuff. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm the biological father and I deserve the chance to be there too. We argued for hours, back and forth, until it felt like we were just repeating ourselves. They kept circling back to the idea of what's best for him, but what they really meant was what's best for us. They wanted me in the background, out of sight, just the bank account they could tap into whenever they wanted. They kept throwing in lines like, well, we don't want to confuse him. But the kid's 5 years old. He's going to get curious about me eventually. How long did they plan on keeping this up? Finally, my lawyer stepped in, laying out our terms clearly. If they wanted child support, then I'd have to be allowed regular visitation, plain and simple. Ted looked like he was ready to explode, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about my son and my right to be in his life. Jane tried one last tactic, saying maybe we could revisit the idea in a year or two, once my son was more used to things. But I was done compromising. I told them that if I didn't get fair visitation, I'd start a savings account for him instead. He'd have that money waiting for him when he turned 18, and he'd know that I tried to be there. I wasn't going to just fund their family while they pretended I didn't exist. When I said that, Jane's face fell. I could tell she hadn't expected me to be so firm. Maybe she thought I'd fold and just pay up to avoid the hassle. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to be some distant ghost in my son's life just because it was more convenient for them. I wanted him to know me, to know that I was there and that I cared enough to fight for him. The meeting ended with no real resolution, and it was frustrating to say the least. But I left feeling like I'd made my stance clear. They knew I wasn't just going to disappear into the background, no matter how much they wanted that. And if they wanted my financial support, they were going to have to give a little too. As I walked out of that room, I felt this mix of anger and sadness. Anger because of everything they put me through, and sadness because, in a twisted way, Ted was right. He'd been there for those years that I couldn't be, and nothing I did would change that. But that didn't mean I was going to give up. I was going to be in my son's life, whether they liked it or not. Walking out of that tense meeting, I felt drained but determined. It was clear by then that Jane and Ted would make this as difficult as possible, but I knew I couldn't just walk away from my son. The stakes were too high, and I wasn't about to let them decide my involvement on their terms. But honestly, the frustration was eating at me. It felt like every step forward got blocked by their stubbornness. A couple of weeks went by, and things went mostly quiet. My lawyer and I were still working on getting visitation rights officially lined up, and I was prepared to go to court if that's what it took. I didn't care about the hassle anymore. I just wanted to be there for my son. But then Jane tried another tactic, a message, this time without any legal stuff involved. She sent it directly to me, bypassing my lawyer, which caught me off guard. It was like she was trying to appeal to me personally, hoping to find some common ground or maybe convince me to change my stance. Her message started out friendly, which surprised me. She said something along the lines of, "I've been thinking about things, and I realize this has all been hard on you too." She went on about how she didn't intend to hurt me back then, and that in some twisted way, she thought she was doing what was best for our son. She added that Ted was still having a hard time accepting the situation and felt threatened by me suddenly being in the picture. I'll admit, part of me wondered if she was genuinely trying to make things right. But the other part of me knew better. It wasn't like she suddenly developed a conscience overnight. She'd hidden my son from me for years, let Ted play dad, and only came clean when it was convenient for her. Her message felt more like another angle she was working than an actual apology. Still, I kept reading, wanting to see where she was going with it. Then she dropped what I think was her real point. She suggested a compromise. She said she could see me having a relationship with our son, but only if I agreed to limit it to a few visits a year and avoid telling him the truth about who I was. She called it a chance to keep things peaceful for everyone. She painted it like she was doing me a favor, offering me this tiny role in my own son's life, while keeping Ted as the main figure. At that moment, any thought I'd had about giving her the benefit of the doubt went straight out the window. A few visits a year and some silent role? I wasn't about to be a glorified uncle in my own son's life. If she thought I'd be okay with that, she clearly didn't know me at all. I fired back a message that was short and direct. If I'm paying child support, I'm his dad. Period. Take it or leave it. She didn't reply, and I figured that was the end of that conversation. A couple more days went by, and just when I thought things were cooling off, Ted called. This was the first time I'd actually heard his voice in years. And to be honest, it sent a rush of anger through me. But I forced myself to stay calm and let him speak. He started by saying he wanted to clear the air and that he thought we could find a way to work this out like adults. I had my doubts, but I kept listening. He admitted that he'd struggled with the whole situation and that he was trying to come to terms with it. He even threw in some comments about how he respected that I wanted to step up and be involved. But Then he got to the real point. He said he was afraid that my involvement would confuse our son, that it might make him feel like he had two dads, which, according to Ted, wasn't healthy for a kid his age. I'll be real, he almost had me with the "let's work this out like adults" angle. But the more he talked, the more it became clear he was just trying to get me to back off. He wasn't interested in finding common ground. He was interested in keeping things exactly how he wanted them, with me in the background. I cut him off mid-sentence and told him straight up, if I'm going to be paying, I'm going to be a part of his life. I'm not here to make things easy for you or for Jane. This is about my son. Ted tried to jump back in, saying something about how I was ruining a family, but I wasn't having it. I hung up, feeling like that was probably the last time we'd be able to have a civil conversation, if you could even call it that. After that, everything went quiet again. But I knew that the next steps were going to be legal. It felt like a strange calm before the storm, where I just focused on preparing for whatever fight they'd throw at me next. But I wasn't backing down. I was going to be a real father to my son, not some occasional visitor or ghostly figure in his life. In the meantime, Ashley was my rock. She kept me grounded and reminded me that I was doing the right thing, even when I felt like the whole world was against me. She was there through every update, every frustrating conversation, every new tactic Jane and Ted tried. I couldn't have gotten through it without her. One night, as we were talking about the future, Ashley said something that really stuck with me. She said, "Your son deserves to know the real you, and he'll thank you one day for fighting to be there." It was exactly what I needed to hear. This wasn't about revenge or getting back at Jane and Ted. It was about my son and making sure he knew that his real dad cared enough to stand up for him. So here I am, still fighting, still waiting for the legal process to play out. I don't know how long it'll take or what obstacles they'll throw at me next, but I know I'm not going to stop. One day, my son will know the truth, and he'll know that I did everything I could to be in his life. It's been a rough journey, but I wouldn't change a thing, because at the end of the day, he's worth it. Last update. After months of back and forths, court dates, and more frustration than I can even put into words, we finally reached a settlement. I'd get regular visitation rights, scheduled times where I could be with my son, without Jane and Ted's rules hanging over my head. It wasn't the perfect outcome I wanted. I wanted to be his dad in every way. But given the circumstances, it was something. The first visit felt surreal. I remember standing outside the park where we'd agreed to meet, my heart pounding like I was meeting him for the first time. And in a way I was. When he ran over to me, there was this moment where it felt like everything just clicked. I saw myself in him. The same curious look, the same wild energy. I don't think I stopped smiling. The entire time. We played, talked, and laughed, and he showed me all the things he loved, just like any regular kid. And for that hour or two, it felt like I was a part of his life, like I was his dad. It's not easy. I still have to see Jane and Ted, still deal with the boundaries they put up, and sometimes I leave feeling like I've barely scratched the surface of knowing him. But each visit, I feel like he's opening up to me a little more. I'm not just some stranger anymore. I'm his dad, and he knows it, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet. And as for Jane and Ted, they're doing their own thing. I think they're finally starting to accept that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm a permanent part of this kid's life, whether they like it or not. They don't have to like it, but they respect it, and that's good enough for now. Ashley's been my rock through all of this. She's gotten to know my son too, and seeing her with him has only made me more certain that she's the one. We're planning our wedding, and while I can't be the dad to him full-time yet, I've got this dream of one day having him there by my side, maybe as my best man when he's older, standing next to me as a real part of my family. It's not a fairy tale ending. I won't ever get those first 5 years back. But every visit, every laugh, every time he calls me dad, even in his own little way, it makes the whole fight worth it. And maybe one day, when he's old enough, I'll tell him the whole story, not to make him pick sides, but so he knows that from the very start, I fought to be there. And I'll keep showing up for as long as he'll have me.